What's up, y'all? It's your girl Phoenix Novell, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Right Hustle. Now, this episode is called How to Get Through Writer's Block. I myself am a hyper creative. I'm somebody who the ideas just don't stop coming. I mean, I have to, sometimes they wake me up in the middle of the night and I sleep with a tape recorder by my bed. I used to, now I have my phone usually, and I'll press the voice memo. But because I don't want to miss an idea, sometimes it feels like a lot. And I used to be the kind of person where I would just try to get them out really fast and not really think them through to make the quality of them substantial, just because I was excited about the idea and I wanted to try it new. But now I've learned how to create a catalog of ideas, and when I am inspired to pursue one of them, I go to the catalog and I kind of like create it. So I'm not somebody who really deals with writer's block on a regular basis, because I have so many projects going on that if this one kind of stumps me, I can move over here to this one and back and forth but there have been times where I really wanted to get a project done and I didn't know where to go, or I didn't know what the storyline was supposed to be. I didn't know where to take my characters. I did not sometimes even have the motivation to put in the work to make it the best that it could be. But I had a deadline, or I really wanted to see it done. It's just sometimes you don't know where to go. And sometimes that's what you want to focus on, but you just don't. Something is just blocking it. Something's in the way. My advice for people to deal with those moments of uncertainty, it's a two-part strategy. One, I would say, get away from the story. Back up. This is not just for writers, because I do this also when I'm making beats and when I'm producing music, when I'm in a creative mode, when I'm drawing or painting, and I'm in overload, right? I'm in that place where there's so many things I want to say, I don't know where to go, but I know that there's something wrong with the flow. I'll sit the project down. I'll step away from what I'm doing, get it out of my head, distract myself with something completely different from what I'm doing, because it removes me from this tension, from this momentum of frustration that usually, kind of frustrates us when we want to go in a certain direction but we can't move for whatever reason. Get away from it. Back up away from the project for as long as you need to. Maybe it's just 20 minutes, maybe it's a whole day, maybe it's a whole week, where you have to kind of step away and fill your mind with other things. You can watch movies, you can read, you can draw, you can just go about your business and live your life. Don't force. Don't ever force, because what usually happens when we force is we're not fully invested in the project. We're not fully considering all elements. We're just trying to push through. It's different from being in the gym. Because if I'm in the gym and I gotta work out and I don't feel like working out, those are the moments that I should work out the most, because my body has to learn how to not be afraid of this assignment. It's different because it's not creative, you want that burn, you want that because you have to get over that hump. With writing, it's a different animal altogether, right? You have to consider all the components and you have to be fully present. Sometimes the body, you do something so much, the body will do it without the mind having to be that engaged. You just know you gotta not lock up your arms or not lock up your legs to get this push in, to do this, so that it's habitual after a while, right? You don't have to be fully invested in it. But with writing and with creating, you got to remember all these components going on. You have to remember where you are in the story. And I'd say, even though I'm a hyper creative, it's always when I get to the middle of the story where I am stuck with these characters. I'm stuck with this theme. I'm stuck with where I started. So now I can't veer off and create something completely, totally different, because I'm going to lose the people who have been invested in what I have already created. So that's why you have to step away and not just try to power through. You can reread it. You can you can kind of go back and review the characters. You can kind of go back and review the story if you need to. But don't create when you're not in that place where creativity just flows and the story kind of tells itself, where you don't have all of the elements in your head and you know how to go forward, right? Because usually those are the pages that you are going to rip up and not be happy with, or that's where you are going to later on read and be like, this doesn't make any sense. I don't really want to go there now. So when you're in that place of writer's block or being stumped, go into review mode. All right, get away from the project for a little while if you don't want to review, or just reread what you've already done. Usually I'll go back to the chapter, the beginning of the chapter or the chapter before of the area that I'm stumped at, just to kind of get a feel of what the flow is, and that'll kind of help me continue the storyline, right? That's how I usually am able to finish what I started or keep the momentum going, by me going back a little bit so that I can see where it naturally wants to go. That's the most natural for me. I never force, because when you force, again, usually you're not happy with it when you're back in your creative mode and you're ready, guns blazing, and you just feel all this creative juice running through you. You're usually not happy with it because you know that you just created because you had a deadline or because you wanted to be able to do it, but you couldn't, but you just had to, right? Those pages, we're not doing anybody any justice, right? So get away from the project if you need to. Review what you already did. And another suggestion is to start from the end. Usually, sometimes we don't. But usually I'm the kind of person where I know I will chart out my chapters before I even write a chapter. Like, for example, in my book, The Boss Bitches Playbook, I wrote down, I knew what I wanted the last chapter to be, because I wanted it to be the most, I wanted it to be something that I thought about the most, that would kind of conclude it. And usually that's the most heavy for most people, right? Death and loss, right? Or forgiveness, something that was heavy. I knew I wanted that to be the end. So I knew everything else before that was going to be lighter than that, right? So I started off with the most powerful, the most potent thing that usually has people excited, but also very nervous or in their feelings, and that's sex or money, right? So I started off with the chapter ideas because I knew the energy. I wanted to understand what the energy would be throughout the book, how the book would flow. All right, sex would grab them, right? It would get them invested. Okay, what she got to say about sex, right? And then I went on, money, friendship, marriage, trust, right? Like that. So I lined it up so that I knew where I was going. In this 14 or 21 chapters, I gave myself an idea of where I wanted to go. And then all I had to do was take it chapter by chapter. The thing about the Boss Witches Playbook is that all the chapters were different. So it was a little different than me actually writing a story where all the chapters had to pick up from where the last one left off. But this is an example of what I mean by sometimes you start at the end so that you can kind of get a feel of how you want the rest to flow or what would cause this ending. Okay, so that was one example, the Boss Witches Playbook. Now, if you were writing a story, right, a novel, where you actually had to get this character from point A to point Z, if you start at the end, then you know how to pace yourself, right? You go to the end. Where is this character ending? Are they dead? Are they in jail? Are they happy? Are they sad? Figure out the walk. You know, when I draw, when I'm learning how to animate right now or do animation. So one of the tutorials I watched mentioned that you need to draw where you want the person to start, and then over here draw where you want them to end. Because if you draw where you want them to end, then you won't have to do that much correcting and scribbling and, you know, as you try to lead up to this person and then you realize, oh, that's not the right spot for them to be in. If you start right here, then you move back, you draw backwards to where they are, because you know how to get them to where they're supposed to be. Sometimes when you have all these ideas in your head and you have too many possibilities from where you are in the story, sometimes it's overwhelming. But if you just think, you don't even have to write it down, just think about how you want this character to end. If you have writer's block and you really haven't thought about the ending yet, think about where they are right now. Maybe they're in a quagmire, in a tough spot, and you need to figure out exactly how they're going to get out where they are. Forget where they are. Forget how you want to figure out how they're going to navigate where they are, and think about where the story is ending. Because if you think about where the story is ending, then it lets you know right away how serious the incidents are leading up to that moment. If they're dead at the end, if that's where you ultimately see them being, then you know you got to keep them alive until the ending, right? You know that you have to pace yourself enough to make that ending, you know, feel like the end, right? Makes sense. You know that the ending is the biggest point. So you can't kill them, right? So you have to think, so now you know I have to think of scenarios that are less finale, because at the end they die. If at the end they fall in love, then that colors what's happening in the middle. All the tumultuous relationships. You know, I was watching Dexter. I've become really hooked on Dexter, the serial killer, but who has standards. And I remember watching the last few seasons, and I remember thinking along the way how I could tell that they were trying to stretch out these storylines so that they can for me, this is just my opinion, right? I love the series, absolutely, watching it a third time around, second time around. But I felt like the pacing had changed from the initial series, where they were they were elongating more people's storylines. They were shortening up my screen time of how often I saw Dexter. For whatever their reasons was, I noticed the pacing, and I noticed how much time was spent on things that really didn't seem important for me as the watcher to know. But I realized, okay, if they know that this person is going to die, if they know that this person is going to, like, if they went to the end first and they decided she's going to die, he's going to do this, then you have to make that middle naturally lead up to that. And they did a really good job at that because of how it ended. I understood how it ended. But in the moment that it was happening, I'm just like, what is this, man? But it made sense because of how it ended. So if you're having a moment of writer's block in that middle part, right, especially in the middle part, if it's in the beginning, it's a little more understandable because you're still trying to figure out who, what, where. But in the middle is usually where people struggle with, because the excitement of something new can wear off, and now it feels like I'm stuck with these characters. I gotta make them make sense. If you go to the end and think about where they're gonna be, if they're going to be who they are now, then you don't really have to do too much to change what's going on with them, right? You can do little subtle things, but if they're not really going through no huge transformations, then that's not going to be the biggest crux for you. But if somebody's dying, if somebody is going to become completely different than they are now, then you have to tell that story in a way that leads us up to the person that they're going to become at the end, whereas though it seems logical throughout the storyline. If you start here and then you end over here completely differently, then I need to understand how that character goes in. And that's why you cannot write just because you want to write. You got to make it make sense. It has to flow well. So figure out how that character is going to end if you're having writer's block and you haven't done that yet. Figure out where we're going. Because if that's the case, then I know how fast I can drive to get there. I know how severe the situations that this character encounter is going to be. And I know what they're going to feel in order for me to make sense of how I want them to end up over here. I hope that made sense, guys, right? So sometimes you got to step away completely from the whole thing and distract yourself with TV, with conversations, with family time, with work, something other than the assignment in front of you. Sometimes you got to do that. Sometimes you got to go to the end and figure out where you want these characters, figure out the metamorphosis that you want these characters to take, if there's any at all. Because that can help you scale backwards and figure out where you want them to be by chapter 11. Where should they be by chapter 8? If you only have 12 chapters in the book, where should they be by chapter 8? Should you bring in more characters like they did in Dexter in order for you to pace the steps of this character by that point, right? What other ways can you show us who they are and make it make sense by that final chapter? All right, guys, it's your girl, Phoenix Novell. Thanks for tuning into another episode of The Right Hustle. My food is here. I will see you guys next time, and keep on creating. Bye.